Well, I'm glad you're here tonight. Let me pray and we'll get going, all right? Lord, thank you for giving us this opportunity to meet together tonight. And we're going to be thinking about some issues that it was very possible we might have given a whole lot of thought to. But I believe it's important for those of us that know you and walk with you that we are paying attention to the fact you want to make a difference not just in our lives, but you want to make a difference in our families. And that there's nothing that we ought to just be blind with respect to thinking about, that we are mindful, that our minds are engaged, and that what we do, we're doing because that's what we believe you want us to do. So I ask that you might bless this time tonight. We say it in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so just so that we're all on the same page, we've got some folks that this is your first night. But two things. One, if you've missed any week, the videos are available on our website. If you have trouble finding that, let me know. But the premise of this is that we want to think about our experience as followers of Christ in parenting from the vantage point of what the finish line looks like. And you get the opportunity to kind of decide what that is. What is the finish line? And I really believe that a finish line that God would want us to celebrate, one that He would want us to focus on, is this, that our children are lifelong followers of Jesus, and that we are making the decisions now as parents or as grandparents seeking to influence or whatever it is, in whatever position we have in a child's life, to try to shepherd their hearts, to guide them, to prompt them, to encourage them, to steer them in such a way where we're doing everything that we can to ensure not simply that they are hardworking and tell the truth, but that they are followers, lifelong followers of Jesus. And so tonight we're going to think about something, like I said in the prayer, that you might not have given a ton of thought to before, and that's our aim tonight, is to get you to think about some stuff. And so since we're having to think, I have to step out of the way. So Caroline has you mostly tonight, so I am a scribe.
And I do, I get home sometimes I worry because so much of this I share is personal, but unfortunately for y'all, that's how I teach. So yeah, bear with me. But after I accepted Christ as an adult, not I was raised in the church, but I didn't, it was how to be a successful person, how to be a good person. I wasn't until after college that I actually accepted Christ. And at that point, I didn't just read the Bible, I studied it. And I was a single person, and I was trying to understand, what does God expect of me as a woman, a single woman in Christ? What would that be? What would He want with me as a wife, and hopefully one day as a mother? And as I read that, I prayed that God would help me see what to look for in a husband, and that I would see what He sees. And one of the things that I was really saddened by is that the Bible says that the husband's to be a spiritual leader. And I was sad about that because I looked at everybody in my life and no one was capable of it. And so I had 2 cats and kind of resigned myself that I can be the cat lady, right? He doesn't owe me anything. He doesn't owe me a husband. He doesn't owe me children. And so I just prayed and I asked God, I said, you don't owe me anything. But if you do see fit to give me a husband, I pray you let me see what you see so I can make the wise decision. And if you give me children, I pray you give me sons so that I can raise up some godly men with your help. Now, I didn't babysit a whole lot, and so that prayer I kind of threw up, and I remember that prayer now that we have 5 sons, and God knew I needed Catherine with these 5 sons. But I remember what I said. And I want my children to have a different testimony than I have. I have one with regret and remorse. I don't want them to have that. And I recognize in order to raise up godly children, to be honest, I didn't have a resume to do that. I didn't have a role model to look to. I didn't have this skill set. And so fortunately, I had an education, and something I learned in my education was if you want to see where you're going to be in 5 years, look at the people you hang out with and the books you read. So I was looking to the people around us, and we had children somewhat quickly after we got married. So a lot of our friends haven't navigated these waters, and I started reading books. This was a very valuable book for me. It's called Raising Godly Children in an Ungodly World. What was interesting about this book is that right out of the gate, it gives a statistic that 90% of evangelical churchgoers send their children to public school. Of that 90%, 70% of those children walk away from the church by the time they're in high school. That was 15 years ago. That was before the, I think, obvious attack on our children's sexuality. It was before a a lot of things that we've seen just in the last 15 years. 70% of public school kids that are from evangelical church-going homes walk away from the church. What I did before I was who I am now is that I was a crime analyst, so it was a lot of statistics. Well, I wanted to know a little bit more about those numbers. So then I read the next book called Already Gone. This is also a good book, especially if you're a Sunday school teacher, and you'll find out why. But in here you find out your kids aren't actually gone once they leave your home. They're gone around middle school. They're just going through the motions. But at middle school, your children are likely already gone, even though they're in church. So when you sit, this was 15 years ago, when you sit in church and look around, over 2/3 of the kids that you're sitting with are already gone. And the question is, what do we do about this? What do we do? And some of the charts that Michael gave you, it shows you what things used to look like. If you were born before 1928, 56% of the people went to church every week. That's over half.
And this is in 2010.
The
The top part in 2010.
In 2010, for millennials, it was 18%. Our world is changing. The worldview is changing. Attendance by generation, you see ages 18 to 34, only 11.3% of that age group is actually going to church. Statistically, we are losing our young people. And I'm here tonight to present something that is hard, and I know how hard it is, but I think it's worth sharing. And I think that those statistics combined with our own ministry experience, one of the beautiful things in being married to Michael is you get to really know people, and through their suffering and through their trials and through their celebrations. And one of the things that breaks my heart is I have seen children walk away from the faith into very sinful lifestyles, even in this church. And it's terrible. In all honesty, recently I taught a girl in 4th and 5th grade who shared with me that she wanted 10 children and 17 dogs. She actually wanted to marry a boy that was in the class. And recently just posted a picture of her having her breasts removed. She's changed her name and takes male enhancement hormones so that she can grow body hair. And this young lady was very active in our church. This is not happening to people who are halfway attending or on the fence. It's happening to people who are in our churches, who are participating regularly. And I think that it's time, battle cry, but we've got to pay attention to this. We live in a time when our public schools have an agenda, and that agenda conflicts with our beliefs. In combination with homes that are broken and lost, you have a curriculum that's being passed down that is godless. And you have children coming from homes where the parents no longer believe. They're exposed to vulgar things on television. They are exposed, their language is horrific. So you have children being saturated with a curriculum that is godless, and they're surrounded by people who are don't share their beliefs or the values that we would want our children to have as Christ followers. I mean, it's getting younger and younger. I mean, this is the thing that was shocking. Even recently, someone in our community was over in our backyard, and she's 10, and she asked Catherine, "Are you going to marry a boy or a girl?" And first of all, Catherine's married, which I'm okay, I'm not ready for her to be scouting out a guy just yet. And she was like, "Well, I'll marry a boy if it comes, if when it's time." And the little girl said, "Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to marry a little boy or a little girl yet. I'll have to wait and see." I was so sad to hear that. And I wasn't there. This is what she told me when she came inside. Another little girl in the neighborhood would have asked one of my children's "Are you gay?" Because I help people come out of the closet. And I called the mother, and it's very awkward because I barely knew them, and I was like, "Hey, I just want to let you know what's going on." She wanted to help somebody come out of the closet, so that's kind of her thing, and we don't believe that. And so I just wanted you. She was shocked; she didn't believe it either. And I said, "Well, I just wanted you to know because it's really hard to be a parent right now. And I want you to get ahead of this because there's something going on, some relationships she had that you might need to stand in the gap, get involved in." This is happening younger and younger. So as we get into this, I kind of wanted to start, let's look at what, some of you may have a 6th or 7th grader. I just kind of want to focus on there because that's where they said you lose them, like that they're already gone by then. What does an average 6th or 7th grader's day look like? What time do they have to wake up? 7:30. And they're at school by what time? 8 is when it starts.
15, I guess. I have one on either end of that, so I
Okay.
don't know anymore.
I picked about 8.
I know when the high school has to be there. That's an hour later, so that gives them an hour to go home.
Well, if we say they start at 8, what time is school end?
They'll get about 3:30,
About 3:30?
if we're right about bus, I guess.
If that child, and some of you from your own experience, if they have to go to after-school care so that you can get them, about what time do you go get them?
5:36 is usually.
5:36. If they play sports, is it going to be during the after-school care or is it after that? After that. So how late after that is like a sports?
Mostly 9 o'clock for us.
You don't get home till 9 o'clock.
Ours, she goes basically straight from school to her after school, or her extracurriculars, and she gets home by 9 o'clock.
Wow. Is that every day of the week?
4 out of 5 days.
4 or 5 days of the week?
We have a neighbor that doesn't get off the bus until 10 till, well, today she was walking into her house at 10 till 6,
Just from off the bus?
off the school bus.
Yeah, we have a kid like that night, but she gets home probably about 6:30.
Yeah,
Wow.
because they're magnet schools,
Yeah.
so they.
Oh, okay. They're driving all around town, dropping kids off. Okay.
Yeah, it takes a while, but she's still away from home from the time she didn't walk in the door till 10 till 6.
Then there's homework, right? There's things that you have to accomplish before you get there the next day. Does that take like an hour? Maybe more, like 2?
At least 2.
And Jalen is in what grade?
9.
She's in 9th grade. Okay, so hers may be even a little bit harder, but like, so around 2 hours.
This was about 7th, 8th grade. She's in honors classes, so she,
Oh, so it started even here.
yeah.
Okay, so,
We got to eat.
Oh, we do have to
We're gonna do
eat.
something
Well,
important.
that depends on the kid too, though, I mean, Maddie doesn't do homework anymore because she doesn't have to, but she's also in honors classes too, but it depends on the day.
But generally speaking,
Yeah.
most kids,
And they're
most
doing
nights.
homework while they're doing something, they're eating supper while they're doing homework.
Yeah.
It's usually combined.
So
for other things,
what
but
time does a 7th grader go to bed?
10, 11, midnight, depending on how much work they have to do.
Right. So we got any of y'all?
I'm in bed at 8.
you what?
I'm in bed at
But
8.
you wake the chickens up, so that's,
We had a 10 o'clock bedtime.
let's just say on average, let's say 10. And like for me, when I was in 7th grade, that would have been.
So some may stay up later, but we're going to go with an average of 10. So
Out of this day, how much time did you have them?
Just enough time to drive them to where they need to go.
So if you added up the time, how much?
Hour max. Hour and a half maybe.
Well, let's just call it 90 minutes. And so this is how many days a week?
5.
how much time are your children at church during the week, realistically? 2 hours on Sunday. That's if they do Sunday school and worship, it's about 2 hours. If they come Wednesday night, 3 hours.
An hour.
When you compare the amount of time the church has compared to how much they're in an environment that is godless, there's no biblical worldview, there's no Bible, there's no God. Compare this to that, like we can see where the struggle is. All of the time is almost being dictated to us by a government system that in many ways is already failing. And we get 3 hours. Even if you want to do a Bible study, you've got 90 minutes. You've got 90 minutes to do it. You may be able to pull one off in the car, but I bet that kid's tired. You may be able to pull one off if you wake up before then, but like maybe your kids are better than my kid. I'm not getting anything done before 7, right? Like unless there are donuts. Like there's nothing getting done before 7 a.m. I don't see how a family can continue to point the children to a biblical worldview to combat all this time where they're being inundated with a message that conflicts with their beliefs. That's a tough fight. If you're not doing anything, this isn't enough. And we need not trick ourselves to think maybe 3 hours a week can combat with, 15 hours a day? 3 hours a week to 15 hours a day. Whether it's focused on, and some of this, like in sports, are they talking about sex outside of marriage? I don't know, but I can tell you from a lot of families here that a lot of times in athletics, that's where oxycodone addiction happened. Like there are influences and all of these things that we have to be very careful about, and we have to be vigilant. When we look at this, we can see the problem, and so what do we do about it? I can tell you what we have done about it, and I can tell you why we have done it, and I can tell you that it is hard. Michael and I chose to homeschool. In truth, I chose to homeschool first. But we had to pull our children, 2 of our kids out of preschool because we couldn't afford preschool. Nathan was in public school for 2 years, and we had no problems with Nathan in public school. I think there was one book that came home in 1st grade that I said, I don't think this is appropriate. The teacher pulled it from the shelf. We had no problems. It was a fine experience. But in bringing my 2 boys home, I found that Andrew did not know his letters or numbers at 4 years old. And so there was a little bit of a problem. And I don't know what it was. I'm not a doctor. I have no training to be a teacher. And so we just started figuring it out. And after a year, I saw that with us working every day on the same things, I cried when he wrote the letter W because it was so hard. But we did it. And I saw, we can accomplish something. And I'm afraid that my son would have been lost if he was sent to the system. And so we learned how to accomplish things and focus, and I figured out I had never taught phonics before in my life. I learned there's an amazing set of rules to our language and was able to teach this. And it was in time and praying that I talked to Michael about it. And Michael was out of the gate a no. No one we grew up with did this. No one in our family does this. We had one friend that did this, but it was something new. And what was your fear? They would be weird. They would be weird. I told my family, and they were like, no, they're going to be nothing but a bunch of weirdos. And I kind of thought that was funny because I had enough exposure to kids that I was like, have you seen the kids in the public school system? We don't have the ownership of all the weirdos. And then Michael had a good point. He was like, weird families have weird kids, right? If ours are going to be weird, they're because we're weird, and they're going to be weird whether we put them in the public system or not. So we heard a lot of negatives about that. Our goal as Christian parents in Malachi 2:15 says we are to raise godly offspring. If you want to leave a legacy of godly offspring, you're going to have to commit yourselves to going against the flow of our culture, because that flow leads to death, that flow leads to destruction, and ultimately that flow can lead to hell. One of the reasons we had to talk about money first is that can make homeschool an impossibility due to debt. There are other reasons that homeschool can be very difficult. If you're a single parent, there are other reasons that it can be difficult. But I think a lot of people just don't consider it. They just don't. They don't want that lifestyle, or they don't see the value in it, or they don't see how high the stakes are. So, after we pulled Andrew and Philip out of preschool, it took a couple years of praying and talk about it, and Michael agreed to bringing Nathan home, and we have never gone back since. I would be lying to you if I don't say I have bad days, and I would put them on any bus that drove slowly by my house, not caring where it went. And if anyone goes to you and says that it is easy, I wouldn't talk to them anymore because I don't think they're telling you the truth. It's hard. It's very much a sacrifice on the parent who stays home with them all the time. But I'm here today because I want to share with you that it's also been a huge blessing, and I don't think we would be where we are at as a family if we hadn't chosen this direction. All right. What are some reasons that people do not want to consider or would say no to homeschooling?
For me personally, it's, I don't have the organizational skills and patience.
Okay, that's what I hear. Well, 90% of the time it's patience. Like if I just say, and I'm just like, oh, homeschool. Like, and people are like, oh, I could never do that. I don't have the patience for that. That's what I hear most. But, and I would put / like organizational skills.
They were homeschooled.
Say it again.
They were homeschooled.
Oh, and had a bad experience with it?
I said he had a excellent, I use the word excellent, local school that the kid goes to. So in my case, Adams Farm just first opened. That's one reason we moved to Adams Farm, the elementary school. And I couldn't be happier with it, so that's why we did public school.
So you were happy with public school?
But some would say, I mean, to pivot off of that, they would say, I'm not going to consider homeschool because in this case, it would represent an academic sacrifice.
There, yeah.
Is that,
And they offer more, you know, in some ways than, you don't have a chemistry lab at your house, whatever it might be.
Lack of socialization, we get a lot of that in class, you know.
Lack of socialization.
It's been definitely.
Selfishness. They're not willing to give up, certain things that they may want to do, depending on what the situation is, even if it's just their hour of time by themselves or whatever it is, because they're always having to do something with a child. I know, I can tell you right now that I personally couldn't do it.
Well, and even I found it shocking how much of my identity I had to lose. Like, I mean, I was not writing books about what I did for a living, but it was like I had to just give that up, and that was tough. What else? So we have suffer academically, finances. Yes. I mean, not only will like one parent need to no longer be employed or be partially employed, there is a cost with the curriculum. Yeah. So finances.
How about extracurricular activities?
Extracurricular activities.
Is it fear?
Fear.
I wanted to double down on the money thing. There's a lot of schools that are giving free meals out. So not only are you not getting that, you're having to provide that. So you're kind of losing, twofold on that.
Right.
So not only are you not getting the free meals, but you're having to provide that. And if you do that over X amount of kids,
It
just
adds up.
continues to multiply. And kids are expensive.
That's true.
Kids eat a lot too.
Kids say what?
They eat a lot too.
This is true. This is true.
Something that was big for us before we homeschooled was we didn't think that we were smart enough.
I was like not equipped. Like,
Like we didn't think that we could do it because we weren't great in school ourselves.
And as she said, I'm just going to add, how equipped will they be when they're going off to high school or college?
and that may fall under like academic sacrifice. Like, are they prepared? Like, are they prepared for college or whatever God calls them into? Can't think of anything else. All right, so I think it's fair to give some replies to some of these. As far as the patience and organization skills, I believe those are learned. I don't believe I came out with the amount of patience I have right now. I believe that the patience was something that I had to learn by slowly taking on being around my children all day and like learning how to manage being around my children and keeping my cool. And I felt like it was a learned thing, and I have to constantly remind myself, or Michael has to remind me, because I have had weak moments, and Michael will have to remind me what our goals are and that I can rise to this challenge. And so I would say, as far as the patience goes, that would be something that can be learned.
And listen, I think we overlook the fact that the reality is, and if you fall into this boat, I promise you, and let me say at the outset of this comment, we're not here tonight to say if you don't homeschool that somehow you're out of God's will, and if you don't get your adult children to homeschool your grandchildren that you got to screw loose. We're telling you that this was a burden that God put on our heart that initially, certainly for me personally, it was something that I resisted, but in the end felt like this is something that God absolutely wants for us. And I think it is likely the case that there are others that he wants it for that have thus far said it can't happen for these reasons, and they don't even give thought to it. But what I was saying just a moment ago, I believe that we overlook how many parents really don't spend much time at all with their kids. And if you don't spend much time with kids, do you know what they are? They're annoying. They're exasperating. They fight. They talk back. They do all kinds of stuff that get on your nerves. And like the average day that we just looked at in the life of a 7th grader, many, in fact, I think there's more than a few, stacks of kids, 90 minutes a day with their parent. It's not, they're not anywhere close to that. Because a lot of times that 90 minutes is spent, or like that home time, they go in the room, they shut the door. And so like you see each other in passing. And so, to Caroline's point, I think absolutely it's learned, but in part it's learned because you're having to spend more time with them than you ever have before.
For the suffering academically, and we'll come back to the bad experience because I hadn't thought of that one. So I hadn't thought about having a bad experience. So you'll have to, if you want to share more, or we can talk about that. For the academically, I've seen that you can go at your own kid's pace. There's not behavior problems typically. If your kid is struggling with something, like for mine, it was recognizing letters and numbers. I could sit down and spend as much time as I needed with that child, and then once they got it, I realized they're actually really gifted in math, so we could fly through math. We were not on someone else's schedule. We could chart it at our own pace. Now I've got a high school student who's taking chemistry. The math has exceeded my comfort level because I don't know about y'all, but even though I could do some in high school, I don't do much, mapping of ellipses and this kind of stuff. So for me to figure it out, it takes an hour. So you need to, there's resources out there. Thank God it's not the pioneer days anymore. There are local co-ops where you can lean on people who actually do this for a living, where they go for a day or 2 days in high school, and then you come home with the work, but you also have someone to reach out to if you need a tutor or you need some help. The online options are incredible, and they're also fairly affordable. My boys all right now take math through an online system where you have a tutor available to you. It checks your work automatically, which I have found is important, and it's just a different game than it used to be 20, 30 years ago when some of us were in the public school system. Things have changed. There's a lot of resources out there. And as far as...
and to that point, though, too, there's teachers in this room as well, though, and you can speak to this, but generally speaking, classes go at the pace of the slowest student. And so if you were in a homeschool situation, you know exactly what your kid's struggle is and what you need to press the brakes on, what you can press the gas on. And when they don't have something and you need to say, we need to go back and review this, you are exponentially more in tune with your child's learning than it's not possible for you to be as in tune if your kid is not homeschooled. And I'm not saying that if you don't, but I'm just saying that there is no comparison the extent to which you're able to know, because they're right there. So it's inescapable.
There's also, you can watch who's winning these scholarships. You'll see homeschoolers winning these scholarships. They're performing at a pace that is good for college. I'm not saying every homeschooler is going to win a scholarship, but you'll see that when you can go at your own pace, you can also enter college with a lot of credits. if you can take these CLEP exams where you walk in and you don't have to take college math, you don't have to take college English, you don't have to take German because you already have the credits.
And candidly, just compare statistics though, the graduation rate in public school compared to the graduation rate in high school, in homeschool, what's the difference? I mean, it's
Homeschool graduates a lot more than high school does.
Oh, absolutely it is. But you say, well, that's because the parents are just saying, well, no. But like you have to take standardized tests. You have to submit those things to the North Carolina Department of Education. So you have to do some stuff. And so statistically, they're going to have a worse experience. Statistically, in a non-homeschool environment, they just are. Statistically, I that doesn't prove anything. But what I'm saying is, I want you to think about this in ways maybe that you haven't before, that maybe it's not weirdo prep.
For the lack of socialization, that there's so much for your kids to be involved in. And one of the things that I've found that may just be my exposure, but homeschool students typically know how to relate to children younger and older because that's the environment that they're in. That they are with adults a lot of times, so they're fairly comfortable with adults. They're used to being around their younger siblings. And so as far as socialization goes, if you've got a weird kid, like they're going to be weird wherever you put them, whether they're homeschooled, private school, public school. If you have a social kid, they're going to find ways to make friends. There are co-ops where children go into classes that are age appropriate. So if you lean that way, you can do that, but you're not sacrificing all that time. It's 1 day a week, it's 2 days a week, and it's also from other families that have decided to make the same sacrifices that you have. So there still can be people with bad influences anywhere you go, and it also doesn't mean that you can't be a bad homeschool. You can still be a bad homeschool. And I also want to say at the outset, and I should probably have said it earlier, I do not believe that just because I do everything I can, that means all my children are going to walk in his way. I pray for it. And I'm going to try to say that I don't look back and wish I had done things differently, but I don't see any guarantee in this. I see the problem of the amount of time that's taken from the families, that I don't see how you can disciple with the very little time that you have the problem with the children. But just like I believe Samuel was probably one of the most obedient men of the Bible, his boys were bad. So I'm not saying that this equals success. I just want to throw it out there because I think that people don't allow it to be on the table for consideration. And I want to challenge that it should be considered. As far as, there was one that wasn't mentioned. A financial impossibility. That can be the fruit of not making decisions with the end in sight. If you make decisions with the end in sight that you want this, you can make decisions many times where you can afford this. It's a matter of priority. I do believe that some people financially simply can't afford it, and I would argue that they need to consider a private Christian school, and there's something called the Opportunity Scholarship. If your kid is in public school, you can apply for it. It's much earlier than you would think it'd be. It's usually like December, January. So most people wouldn't know about it. You apply for it. We actually won one this year for Peter. You have to be either going into kindergarten or first grade, or you have to be currently enrolled in public school. If you are, you apply, and if you meet their requirements, they will give you $4,000 to go to a private Christian school or any private school. There are several schools in this area that would be almost, you pay nothing more than that. It may be like $1,000, but there are several small. Now, Wesleyan is more expensive. It's like $10,000 to $12,000. But you've got Vandalia, you've got Shining Light, you've got Hayworth Christian Academy, you've got Triad Baptist that are all within that range. And that's a Christian education. And that is renewable every year. That's not 1 year. That's for the rest of the child's. They'll give you that every year, as long as you, unless you start making a lot of money and you no longer fall into their threshold. But
to her point, though, as part of the reason that we talked finances last week, and one of the things that I had said is to operate and to make decisions in such a way that you keep the most doors open. And a lot of times, financially, we make decisions that close doors. And I believe it's the case. I mean, that especially if you have a two-parent household, that you can, for example, your biggest expenses on a monthly basis are going to be mortgage and auto stuff. And so if you say, we're going to have a really, really nice house, that's going to come typically with a really unlovely mortgage, and we want to drive really nice new cars. I mean, especially now that it's ridiculous what car prices are, and you have locked yourself into, we have to have this income because we have to have these things. I mean, at the end of the day, life is about, following Christ is about, experiencing parenting is going to be an exchange of sacrifice. So you have to say, what is it that I value more? And so it could be that for some, the whole financial cost would say, well, that can't happen. But maybe if you step back and say, are there some choices that we could make where it could become a possibility? Again, this is not to say this is what God wants for you exactly, and this is what everybody in this room, they need to leverage their families and in their own homes. They need to do this. But understand that I think too many times we close the door before we ever even give consideration to it.
So where are you going to send Peter?
Okay, so Peter has some learning struggles, and if any of y'all have met him, he is a strong-willed child. He is I realize this is being recorded. Like, I thought that I had had a difficult child, and I had not until I had Peter. He challenges me, and I would say that we have accomplished incredible things together. But I was worried that I could not do it, and maintain. I have 5 other children, and a 2-year-old, like 4 regulars, and then like a 2-year-old running around. And so we went and looked, and we fell in love with one of the schools, and
Well, it was Wesley, and we had a tour guide whose name is Angel. I mean, like, really?
well,
No.
because I prayed about it, and God said no. I'll be honest, I don't understand.
So where are you going to go?
He homeschool, I homeschool him.
To what?
I homeschool him.
Back at Alcatraz.
I really,
I thought you said you were supposed to send Peter to school.
no, well, I got the scholarship,
So
or the grant.
She was like, I would like to.
I wanted to. Everything in me
But you
wanted to.
changed your mind?
I prayed about it, and God gave me such a clear no that I do not understand the reasons for, and that's very hard, right? I wanted him to go. I wanted him to be in a classroom. Oh, no, I'm emotional tonight. When we went in the class, the teacher, all the little kids were sitting, and she was reading a book, and everybody was like listening. I mean, I was almost like, did they drug them before we went in there? They were all just like, oh, and it was like, and then Jesus said to the little children, and I'm sitting in there, and I'm crying, because I know how things go at my house, right? And like, it can get ugly because it is hard sometimes to be a mother. It is hard. And so, I'm crying, and I get in the car, and Michael's like, write the check, like whatever extra, do that, and I said, just because a woman's name was Angel doesn't mean this is God's will. Just because we got the scholarship doesn't mean it's God's will. I don't have peace. And when I had peace, he made it so painfully clear that it took me 2 weeks to send the email to say I decline the grant.
And bear in mind, that would have effectively, with some things that were on the table, he could have effectively gone. It wouldn't have cost anything.
It would have cost something more to go to Wesleyan, but that would have been 13 years of education.
So how's it working out?
I see. I will say, like, do I have hard days? Yes, I do. Do we hold hands every day and say our alphabet together? Right? No. But he can read. And Peter could not recognize his letters, and it took me 5 months to teach him the letter L and the letter M, 5 months. Letter L and the letter M, 5 months, right? And now he can read. That's amazing. So I thank God for that. Do I understand yet? Like, do I still think, oh my goodness, let me go and hand this over, right? Let somebody else do this? Yes. I do. Like, I do struggle with that, and I have to pray about it, because I think that because I was raised in the public school, I played sports, I think things should be a certain way. But in truth, I don't think that they have to be that way. And so I have to remind myself what I'm going for. And what I'm going for is that I promised God that I wanted to raise godly men. So I'm going to do everything in my power to lead that. Is that a guarantee? No. But am I going to put everything on the table? Yes. God told me no. So Peter stays home with me. Another one that is actually one that I hear the most of that's not up here is, what about being the salt and light? Do you know what I'm talking about? What does that mean? Why would people say that to me?
Take all the good kids out of school and
Right. So I'm going to send my kid to public school to evangelize the public school. Okay.
Not enough of them.
Or they can't, even if it is enough, they're little kids.
It is unfortunate, but there's actually two scriptures that the salt and the light are a part of them. One of them is Matthew 5:13. It says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." If you actually read the whole sentence, I believe that unfortunately we see our children losing their saltiness. Mark 9:50 says, "Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other." It was during VBS that I had given up this scholarship, and it was I was just oh, this year's going to be tough. And I was talking to a lady who's an older friend of mine, and I said, "I don't understand it, but I have peace, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm getting geared up for it because I'm not going to fail at this." And she said, "Caroline," she said, "I think the reason God did that is because once they're exposed to so many things, you can't get it out of them. You can't rewind. Once they're exposed to so much, you can't go back." And she had some experiences that I could learn from, and the truth is, I don't know why, but this is what God's called us to do, and I wanted to share this with y'all because it can be done. I'm not organized. I'm not naturally a patient person. I have no degree. We don't have a lot of finances. As far as extracurricular activities, you'd be amazed at what's available for the homeschoolers. And also what's nice about this is a lot of these sports do not interfere with church. My boys run cross country, not because they actually they'd rather play basketball or football, but the cross country never meets on Wednesday or Sunday. So I could allow them to do that and not have to tell them, "Oh, you can't do that." It fascinates me that children can't be at church for sports, okay? Now, that they can get them to the sport event during church, but that is also teaching the children that something is more important than church. And I'm saying that knowing I'm stepping on people's toes, but think about it. If in these high school years you get such little time with them and then you teach them that they don't have to go to church, where will that desire come from? Will they all of a sudden wake up one day and just want to come to church? How are they going to teach how are they going to teach their children? I believe we're on the fringe of seeing if the church exists. I do. I believe, when you look at these statistics and how they're going, is the church going to exist as we know it?
And if you want to see what it looks like, then look at Europe, because Europe is godless. Look at Great Britain. It is godless.
The buildings are abandoned.
It's their museums,
Yeah.
and it is. And I want to go back to this salt and light thing though, because it sounds very reasonable. Say, well, if we take the good kids out, we take the believing children out of if all of them vacate the schools, then it'll just be a cesspool. That for one thing, in terms of logic and reason, it's creating a strong man, because that's not actually the case. For one reason, God has made every one of us, every person that comes into this world, when Romans 1 describes, He's etched His law in our hearts. You don't have to be a follower of Christ to be a decent person. You don't have to be a follower of Christ to be a moral person. So it is not the case that you have nothing but gang violence and anarchy if believers aren't in school. But the reality is this: the public school system in the United States hasn't existed forever. 1853 is the first time you have a public school in the United States. And it hasn't been around forever in the course of human history, and it's not even been around since the beginning of the United States. Statistically speaking, what's going to happen, and you know this to be true, so much of the Christian life revolves around sacrifice and saying no to me, no to urges that I have that are at odds with God's will. And you've heard this before, though, but I think the cliche bears fruit, that we are like electricity. We're prone to the path of least resistance. And if children are in an environment where they are saturated with saying no to what God has said and yes to what I want to do and what all my friends are going to do, the salt many times, and statistics bear this out. Look at this. This bearing it out, that they're going to lose their saltiness. And it's also a false notion to suggest that there's not opportunity for engagement, not opportunity for conversation, not opportunity for evangelism, not opportunity for crisscrossing and sharing life together, except in the public school. Because that's just nonsense. It's gobbledygook. You have plenty of opportunity to engage others, to engage peers, to have outside of church relationships with others, those that aren't connected with God, those that aren't connected with church. Those opportunities do exist, and so in the end, I would say that's a straw man argument, and it doesn't pass the sniff test in my estimation.
We ended up here as a part of trying to be obedient to what God has called us to. We don't know what God has called your family to do, but we wanted to share with you that this has been a blessing to us. I don't know how this sounds, but sometimes when people see my family and everybody's on good behavior, right? Because like my children, just like I am a sinful person, right? Like there are no angels here. But if everybody's on good behavior and like it goes without fail, someone will come because they see these stack of his, like, you are so blessed. And I say, thank you, I feel blessed. No, you don't know, you're really blessed. And what I'm thinking is that's disguised for a lot of hard work. Right, like that's a lot of discipline. That's a lot of holding the line. That's a lot of sacrifice. That they can just be disciplined for an hour while you see them. There's a lot of sacrifice on that. Nobody's given good kids. We're all sinful creatures. But if you put them in an environment where there is so little light and there is so little hope, I worry about them. And I'm willing to, I wanted to say this because I can't stand seeing any more kids walk away. And we got to fight for them. We got to sacrifice for them because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to raise up godly children and do everything we can to protect them from sinful influences in the world. Sorry, I'm emotional tonight. But that's what I wanted to share. And there may be some more things that y'all would like to share or talk about, and I'm open to that if somebody else had a comment or a concern or a question.
So if you didn't homeschool, you would definitely go to Christian school?
Yes. I feel like statistically
but especially
alone.
for us, though, like with 6 kids, I don't know how we'd afford that. I mean, I just don't.
But where I'm coming from is Christian school really Christian? You know, not all the kids are.
No, I mean, it's, I mean, and two things.
It's kind of like, not a crapshoot, but because most of them are Christian good people, but how do you know? Or
And honestly, there's a
where's
second.
they worth the money?
Because then if you're not going to homeschool, you have to make a choice. There's limited choices. If you're not going to homeschool, you either need to do private school, charter school, which is like a flavor of public or public. At least in private school, you can do the research to make sure the curriculum includes God. You can make sure that the teachers are teaching them from a biblical worldview. Are they going to sit next to a kid whose parents pulled them out of public school because they were getting in a lot of trouble and are hoping that this will turn them around? Yeah, absolutely, that's possible. But if you're not going to homeschool, that's a better solution, in my opinion. If you do if you go to the school and look at the curriculum, that is better than at this point putting them in public school.
I actually went to Christian middle school, and it was not perfect. We had a drug dealer in one of my classes, but I can also attest to it's nowhere near what public school kids are exposed to. I mean, you're still exposed, of course, nothing's perfect, but it was not like what I know Jalen is exposed to. And it was very Christian. I mean, we went to service every Wednesday. Even in our classes, there were prayers. There was a lot of Bible teaching. It really was. So, that's something that we really wanted for our kids. But it's expensive, and we have 3. I can't imagine having 6. But even for just 3, it's. So when you brought that up, I would love to have more information. Because we both looked at each other at the same time, oh my gosh, that'd be great. Because that's really what we want. But again, no, it's private Christian school is not perfect, but it's also not
Well, and like at the end of the day, nothing is perfect. I mean, like homeschool, I mean, it is. I mean, I can't take the number of times I come to Carolina is like, where's the cigarettes? and like, or but like you're stressed. I mean, because
You get no break from them. It's toe to toe. But in truth, like when my friends say, well, what would you do if your kid did this? I was like, oh, I'd shut their world down
Yeah.
because I can, right? You don't get to get away from me. So if you're going to walk in that way, I'm shutting it down, everything. You will walk in this way. Like, I mean, it's just a behavior thing. Right now, there's a little bit of talking back going on, right? Like, they can't get away from me. So it's like that makes a different life because they're stuck.
Is Olivia coming on Wednesday nights?
No,
Is y'all's daughter Olivia?
no.
Oh, it's not,
Yes, she's my daughter, she's not here on Wednesday night.
she don't come on Wednesday nights?
No.
Why I asked, I know y'all been coming lately, but a couple of years ago, I saw her up in the youth group, and she's like just a natural leader for our youth, and I thought she'd be such a good influence on what she's doing now.
Yeah, I'm one of the parents that she has soccer, so she doesn't come on Wednesday night, that's me.
Carolyn, I have a question. If, you said you shut everything down, when it comes to discipline, how does that work with other people trying to discipline them?
Like who? Like,
I'm just saying anybody, because I guess a little bit of what we went through whenever everybody went remote was, I think one of our biggest issues was our kids kind of thrived off of discipline from other people other than us. Like Bennett and Graceland in the school setting, well, Bennett now, but Graceland in the school setting did very well. And she's very smart. I consider us to be, fairly intelligent. But whenever we got the opportunity to sit down and do work with her, it was like pulling teeth. But you put her in a class setting, which she went to Westwood Memorial, she was in a Christian school, in my opinion, a good school, but like, what we were trying to do with her to get her focus and stuff like that was very, very challenging. But when she went to school, she was off the charts. Graceland's great, Graceland's this and that. But when we come home, it's like, who is this? Terrible.
okay, I've kept your children are wonderful. So like their A game is an A game. So, but sorry, you're getting something different at home. But I would say though, like when I'm with homeschool moms, and I didn't realize I'm one of the older ones now, but it's like there's like a period where they have to get used to you. So when you pull them out or when you're doing remote learning, they have to get used to you and your discipline style and realize the rules. And the exhausting part is you have to be consistent and you have to hold the line. And it's exhausting. I mean, it is. But as soon as you don't hold the line, like it's off track. But I would say there's a period where you just take the hit. I mean, it's just like potty training, right? Like if you give up, they're going to still be in a diaper. So you have to take the hit. No, we're going to go potty in the potty. It's like, so with anything, you take the hit, you figure it out together, and they get used to you and your discipline, and then it works for you.
And
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, but I think part of it stems from this though, because like we'll have. I mean, this is not some blue ribbon that I'm trying to wear. But sometimes we'll be out in public or something, and we've got this stack of kids with us, and somebody may remark, said, "Boy, your kids are really well behaved." And I really think that part of the reasons our kids, I mean, again, they're not perfect by any stretch, and they're still kids, and they do dumb stuff, and they get on each other's nerves. They get on other. We have all that stuff, but generally speaking, those still for kids. I think. Not because they're ours, but I think that when we try to operate in ways where they're well behaved. And one of the things I'll say to people like this is this: like especially if you got one or two kids, you can tolerate some nonsense. If you got 6 kids, I mean,
Yeah, none of it.
Because I mean, you're just overwhelmed by it. And so, with respect to what you just described, I think in a classroom setting, if you're the teacher and you're one teacher or a teacher and an aide with 28 kids, you've got to run a tight ship, because very quickly you're going to get overrun. And I think kids in a classroom setting, they get acclimated to that because the teacher's not going to tolerate the nonsense because they can't. All of a sudden, I mean, the inmates are going to take over the asylum. And so...
But I would also say with remote learning, that's not the same thing as homeschooling, because like it sounded like a nightmare to me.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like I would have failed at that, like, and trying to meet everybody's expectations. Like when you homeschool, like you can pivot, right? Like, or you can spend an extra day on that, or you can adjust, I don't know, you can make adjustments. So it's like, I think that's much harder than homeschooling too, is that you're not actually in control. You're just like they're funneling it down what you need to get them to do, it's much harder.
Additional perks, no fundraising requests.
Yes. No emails, no emails.
Yeah, or
and-
the robocalls.
Right.
Yeah, that was terrible. I'm sorry.
But I think I can kind of piggyback on what they're saying too, because we went from traditional school to homeschooling. We're in our second year now. It was rough to start out, because JP has always been, oh, he's a delight, he's such a good kid, blah, blah. When was he a good kid? Because I was ready to strangle him. I love him, don't get me wrong, but I was ready to strangle him. He is part his father and part me, and sometimes not all the good parts. But the great thing about homeschooling is you can put it away, walk away, and come back to it. You can take that break. You can, you know what, let's separate for a few minutes. Let's, so we don't get into a yelling match because you're being pig-headed and I'm trying to get you to understand what we need to do, but you're off over here for whatever reason. So it was learning, and like you guys said, it was learning to focus on the child and find out what we needed to do, how we needed to start the day, and how we needed to work with him. How long was his attention span going to be on these subjects? When to take breaks, when we could recognize when he needed the breaks.
And that your homeschool doesn't have to look like a public school.
Exactly.
It's different.
You don't have to have
Busy
that.
work. And
That we do math at like 5 o'clock in the evenings because that's when I get off work and that's the subject I have. But Tony does most of the homeschool stuff. I help out a lot with it. I wish he were here to talk on it too, because he feels really strongly too about the homeschooling. We have no plans to send him back. That was a different case in the summertime. In the summertime, we were like, yes, he's going back. That was after year 1. But God spoke to us and gave us a very clear, no, he's not going back.
Well, and all I could, like, Caroline had been urging or saying, and like, she didn't drag me into this. And so, but like, at the end of the day, I feel like it had to start with her because she's the one that bears the brunt of the burden. For me, though, it was the whole weird thing but I remember being on Wendover crossing I-40, and all I can describe is, and there have been just very few instances in my life where I can say that this was the case, I just felt this really strong impression. I just felt like it was a word from God. Hey, this is what you need to do. And I called Caroline on the way and said, hey, this is what I think. I think God's in this. And so, but I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't privy to the conversations, but I knew she was bearing the weight of it. Let me just say this. I know we want to wind this down. We can talk more about this and a couple of things. Let me please reiterate. We're not saying if you have and continue, and we're not saying that this is exactly what God wants you to do. What we are saying is it may be something that God could guide you to do. Let me share with you this little, and I've never mentioned this before, at least publicly. I came to Gate City in October of 2010, so we are a week away from 11 years. Since I have been here, one person, in fact, Eddie's son, Michael, has been called into ministry. At this point, we have 8 who were involved in children's ministry or student ministry during that time that are either gay, transgendered. So just on that front, 8 to 1. Less than 10% of every person that you've seen cross our stage for graduate recognition, less than 10% of them are involved in church anywhere. Maybe we ought to do something different. And we keep operating with the notion, well, we're just not, this is just what we do, this is just what we do, this is what we do. And when we don't think about it, and when this is what we do, what you see is this number. Christianity is disappearing off the face of the continent of Europe. I mean, look, what do you think is going to happen in another generation in the United States? Maybe we need to do something different. And part of our argument is, and part of our burden about this is that if the majority of my children's time is spent in an environment where God's not even part of the equation, in fact, and as time is progressing, it's not simply that God's not part of the equation, but an anti-God perspective is a part of the equation. Where a Christian worldview and biblical morality is lambasted, it is nearly impossible for me to offset that investment when they get that the vast majority of the day and they're under my roof 90 minutes of awake time. So our encouragement is, think about it. Pray about it. Those of you that still have children at home where you're processing these decisions, you've got opportunities to make decisions. At the end of the day, I don't want you to do what Michael wants you to do or what Caroline wants you to do. I want you to do what God wants you to do. But it's possible sometimes, and we can do this about 1,000 different things. We can close doors that God may be wanting us to go through because we just won't even think about it. And so what we want to do is to put some information on the table tonight, maybe give you some opportunity to think. And so, Eddie, we getting asked something?
Yeah, somebody asked me when Michael first got called in the ministry, well, aren't you surprised? I said, no. Michael was brainwashed, and I'm using that term, from 1 month old, going to church 3 times a week. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. So he knew no other. Of course, I was pretty strict on him for a while. I would let a good family life, for example. But besides that, where I'm really coming from is going to church 3 times a week, and even for us to try to stay closer to God. What I'm getting at, do we need a good, strong Sunday night program for everybody, really? But Wednesday kind of takes care of itself, so more. But do we, would it help? My question is, would it help if we had 3 solid times that we can kind of brainwash?
No, here's what needs to happen. We've got to get back in the home. Because part of what you just described is, and I don't mean to wag fingers here, but part of it is this notion that the greatest influence, the greatest Christian influence that my children are going to experience are going to be at church. I've said this from the pulpit before, and I would encourage you to think about this. If your child only knew about God and only knew about the Bible, what they learned in your home, what would that be? So take out anything that they ever learned in church and ask yourself this: how does that mesh with Deuteronomy 6:6? Where it's my job to impress upon my kids that I am expected, God's going to hold me to account for raising up godly children. That means that the church has a role, but it doesn't mean that we're sitting at the head of the table. We're invited guests. We're supplemental. And so I think the plan next week is to begin talking about how you can actually talk, because we talk about, you need to talk about the Bible. You need to do Bible study in your home. But how many of you feel like, I can really do that? I know how to do that. Most families would say, I don't know how to. We've never done it. We get lambasted sometimes and feel guilty about we don't know how to do it. So we're going to talk about some ways to actually do that, to try to put some tools in your tool belt so that you might be able to, on a practical level, be able to do that. But the reality is, even that becomes difficult when you have so little, if the window of time that you have them is so small. And so, there's a progression here. And we talked about money because that very well can close the door for many to even the possibility. And if there is no time in the home, that closes the door to be able to invest in them godly truth. So that's where we're headed next week. So anyway, we've held you late. We'll talk more if you want to afterwards, but let me go ahead and pray and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for letting us walk through these issues tonight. And I pray that people realize as they are sitting here and as they leave, as they think through these issues, I pray that you give them the discernment to recognize Michael's voice or Caroline's voice as opposed to your voice. My hope is that we have been saying things that are in alignment with what you may be saying to the hearts of moms and dads and granddads and grandmoms grandmothers in this room. I pray, Lord, that at the end of the day, we realize that there are plans and purposes that you have for us, plans and purposes that you have for our family. And we need to be mindful. We need to be engaged in prayerfully thinking about everything. Instead of just setting the cruise control and say, well, this is what I did. This is the decision that has been made by multiplied generations before me, to start saying, hey, God, what is it that you want me to do with my family, with my children, even with their education? And as you guide, I pray you give us the courage, whatever that is, to follow it and experience the peace that comes from knowing that we're doing what you're asking. So we say this in Christ's name. Amen.